To welcome everybody, I'll start it officially and then we'll chat some more. It's just much easier. We're delighted to have Vicki Delany from Canada with her book, Murder in a Teacup, and Daryl Wood Gerber with A Glimmer of a Clue. You both have amazing backgrounds and I've been reading that. Good for you. Women, I don't know if this is true, but I get the feeling that women, when they want a career in writing, they have more challenges than perhaps a man who can go shut himself away all day and write, because the woman generally takes care of the children, plans the meals, does all of the domestic things at the same time they're trying to be creative. You mentioned, or I read, Vicki, that you were the single mom of 3 high-spirited daughters.
Yep.
I had 2. That was enough. And by the time they got to be a certain age, mom didn't know very much. And it's interesting. So you did that. And Daryl, I know that some of my things are out of date, but I've always read about that you were owner of this wonderful cookbook store in coastal California.
That's what I write about, the cookbook Nook Mysteries, right?
Yes, but what they put down in here, it just creates such a picture, doesn't it? I mean, I love bookstores, and I can't, just the image that one line draws up for me makes me think, oh, I want to find that bookstore and go to it. Well, and find out what's happening.
You know, it's funny, Anne, but the reason I came up with that idea is I was out at Malice Domestic, the conference out in Virginia, and we had a book signing at a culinary bookstore. And I fell in love with this store. It was called Salt and Pepper. It was in Occoquan, Virginia. Yeah. And I just fell in love with the store. And I was with my friend Krista Davis, and I said to Krista, don't steal this. This is my idea. I'm going to write this as a series. And so I came up with it and put it on California because I live in California and I wanted more things that I wrote to be where I lived or around where I lived. And I fell in love with this story. It was filled with cookbooks. It was filled with fiction about food, like chocolat and you know, water from chocolate. And it had aprons. And it had all these lovely little salt and pepper shakers and things that you could buy for your kitchen. It was so adorable. I fell in love with the store, and that's where it came from.
It was great inspiration, though.
Yeah.
It really was.
Thank you.
And Vicki, yes. You're setting yours. I'm looking at my notes here. You've got the Tea by the Sea.
That's right. It's in the tea room, so that you can see by the cover, right? Obviously, we've got, get the light out of it. We've got a little table all set for after tea with some scones, a little cat, nice view out the window. So this is, yeah, it's set in a tea room that serves a traditional afternoon tea. So I really get carried away with descriptions of what she's making today and what they're serving in the tea room, all very traditional afternoon tea, you know, the pretty little sandwiches, the scones with butter and clotted cream and homemade jam, and then the beautiful pastries.
Oh,
and the different
you're making me hungry.
And everything's served in fine china with, you know, linen tablecloths and all that sort of stuff. So it's just an idealistic little tea room. And it's also based on not one particular thing, but tea rooms I've been to, you know, over my lifetime, because it's something that I really enjoy doing. And afternoon tea is, I think these days, it's a real indulgence. It's not an everyday occurrence. It's something, because it costs to have a really good afternoon tea in a nice place. It costs a heck of a lot because everything's fresh and the serving is beautiful and the ambiance and all that sort of thing. So it is a treat for most people and an indulgence. And I try to make it that way in my book too, that she's, you know, she treats it as something very special for everybody when they come for her teas.
I think that's lovely. Both of you create an atmosphere that is, you want to launch yourself in and live in for the period of time you're reading the books. I just think that's great.
Other than the dead guy on the floor, we'll go to those places if they don't keep the dead people around.
Yeah. Just so you know, they're in my fairy garden mysteries. They serve tea. It's nothing like Vicki's tea. It's a Saturday afternoon tea, but it's because they're just coming to look at fairy gardens, and they can have tea and they can have some lovely scones and cookies, but we don't get the clotted cream. We don't get the high service. It's not on fine china. It's just a lovely little afternoon on a patio having tea.
That sounds quite lovely to me.
It does to me too. We should have more of those around here. I don't even know that.
There's something.
I'm not aware of a tea room locally.
There's something about tea that lends itself to that kind of formality on one hand, but elegance, it maybe is the word I'm searching for. You know, if you come for tea and you imagine something very delicate, it doesn't have to be the whole spread, but just something delicate and poured out of a beautiful cup, or say come for coffee and they slap a mug down on the plate, you know, handful of beverages.
It's true. When you think of tea, you think of raising the pinky and adding sugar and stirring it and taking your time, savoring it. It can even be, you know, it can even go cold and lukewarm and you'll still drink it. You won't usually drink lukewarm coffee.
Definitely. And something about coffee doesn't lend itself to these lovely pastries as much as it does.
I'm a coffee drinker, so I like lovely pastries and coffee.
Okay. So, oops, I'm missing someone here. Let's get Sharon in here. See, I get busy talking or listening. And Sharon is joining us.
Right.
Hey. And Wendy's down there and still remaining mysteriously. Yes.
Muted and visionless. Okay.
That's fine. As long as she can hear. I hope she can hear.
Absolutely. So who wants to go first and tell us about your latest book? And you've given us a little bit of background, both of you, as to why you have launched these series. But tell us about what's happening, where you are now, and where you're going with it. Who wants to go first?
You go first, Vicki.
I'll start. Okay, so this is my newest book called Murder in a Teacup. Try and get the screen right. And as I say, that you can tell exactly by the cover what this book is about. It's set on Cape Cod and it's set in the tea room. So this is the second in the Tea by the Sea series. The first was called Tea and Treachery, and that came out last year. We have, you know, the same general sort of setting. So it's set on Cape Cod in a small fictional town in the Outer Cape. And essentially, it's about a woman who runs a tea room called Tea by the Sea, which is a very traditional afternoon tea room. But it happens to also be on the grounds of her grandmother's B&B. Her grandmother owns a big old Victorian house built in 1865 that she's converted into a B&B. And the grandmother was a kitchen maid in Yorkshire in her youth. She started working for Lord and Lady in the house, and she was 14 years old as the kitchen maid, very Downton Abbey, think Daisy in Downton Abbey. And, you know, she bumped into an American soldier in town one day, and as she said in the book, you know, when he got out of the hospital, he came to call on her, and she then moved to Iowa, where she raised her family. And the grandmother's name is Rose Campbell. So it's actually almost a two protagonist series, although Lily Roberts is the point of view character, but the grandmother has a very important part to play. And the grandmother moved from Iowa when her husband died, and she bought this great, because she's always wanted to live by the sea, and she missed the sea so much when she was living in Iowa. So that when her husband died, after 50 years of a very, very happy marriage, she moved to Cape Cod and bought this house that was her dream house with this big mansion. And unfortunately, she can't afford to live in it. So she had to turn it into a B&B, much to her own displeasure, but she wants the house that she needed. And she managed to talk her granddaughter into coming and helping out in the B&B and running the tea room. So as happens in your cozy mystery novels, and this is obviously a very cozy, as you can tell by the cover, same with Daryl's book, you should be able to identify a cozy right away. People come to the B&B, they come to the tea room, and someone ends up dead. So I do hope that the book's got a fairly lighthearted feel about it. Lily's best friend is named Bernadette Murphy. Everybody calls her Bernie. Lily calls her the warrior princess. And she's based, actually almost never do I base any characters on someone I know personally, but this one is based on a real friend of mine. And my friend knows that I've based it on her, that my friend wants to write a book. And she's really talented, but she can never, ever settle on an idea. She leaps from one idea to it. Completely different. She'd set a book set in King Solomon of the Bible's time, and then she decided to change that, and she would create a fairy tale themed book. And then she decides that she's not happy with the beginning, so she'll write the end, but then she can't figure out how to write the beginning. You know what I'm trying to say? She will never, ever get it done because she can never settle on an idea. So I had fun, and my friend knows that she's the inspiration for this. So I had fun doing that with Bernie, the friend. That Bernie is always herring off in one direction or another with a fabulous idea for a book. And, she completely changes it in the middle of the day, she'll see something that catches her attention and she goes rushing off and changes the plot of her book completely. So I had a lot of fun with that. So essentially there's the three main characters. There's Lily Roberts, who all she wants, poor Lily, is to run her tea room. And her grandmother and her impetuous friend just keep dragging her into mysteries because something has happened and a mystery has to be solved, and they feel that they're going to go ahead and do it. And Lily is the only one that can keep them out of trouble, so she gets dragged along into helping them. So essentially, that's the plot of the book.
I love it. Have you spent a lot of time in Cape Cod?
No, not a lot. I went there a couple of years ago because my Sherlock Holmes bookshop series are also set in Cape Cod. So I did go down and do some research there. The main reason I set the books in Cape Cod is actually that's a one-day drive from me, so I can drive there in a day. And sadly, I have not been able to go back for the last 2 years. Obviously, I wanted to go back actually last summer when the first book out, when Tea and Treachery came out. I had in mind doing some, book signings and in Cape Cod, and I had kind of started at the end of the winter, saying about lining up a few things. Well, of course, that never happened because the borders closed. So sadly, I haven't been able to go back. So hopefully that's something I can get around to doing next year. Because I did for this series, I do have questions for places I didn't go when I was there the first time. But you can learn a lot online, but it's not the same. It's not the same as going there and actually seeing, seeing the color of the water at sunset and that kind of stuff. So let's hope I can go next year.
Oh, I hope so too. I hope we can all meet together. Certainly, certainly by next year, if not sooner. It makes such a difference.
It does. It does. Zooming is fun, but it is different.
Very different. Yeah.
So Vicki, I have a title for you if you haven't used it yet. Tempest in a Teapot. It's obvious. Tempest in a Teapot.
Tempest in a Teapot. I'll keep that in mind.
Okay. I mean,
yep, because there will be a new one next year, and then another one coming after that. So so I'm contracted for 2 more.
So you need titles. I'm a title person. I love titles.
Because I can never think up titles. Absolutely not. I ask my agent. I ask my editors. I just
write me anytime. I love titles.
Absolutely. I'm looking for somebody to help.
Now, one of you had mentioned that you met each other before at a convention, or?
Yeah.
But a few times, actually, several times
but our first meet was at Malice Domestic in Virginia. Yeah.
Okay. And that's been going on for quite a number of years. It's a well-established, wonderful organization. But that's, it's always fun when you've actually met each other. But it's also fun to get used to somebody new that you haven't met, right?
Right. Vicki and I also blogged together. I've left the blog, but we blogged together on Mystery Lover's Kitchen. And so we had a lot of interaction because of that too, because both of us write recipes and include recipes in our books. And so we were able to feature our recipes on the blog, which is a great way to show off mystery writers who love to kill people.
Oh, that's right. That it's so popular at the store. Every time someone comes in to get a book, they're always asking, do you have any more, the book plates with the recipes on them? They just love that. They go by so quickly.
Great.
Yeah. Vicki, tell us, Daryl, I'm sorry. Tell us about yours.
Okay, so my latest new book is A Glimmer of a Clue. That's it. And it features a fairy garden shop owner. So how many of you know what a fairy garden is? If you don't.
I do now. I didn't used to, but I do now.
A fairy garden, and I'll show you. This is the very first book. This actually shows a fairy garden in it, okay? Mm-hmm. And a fairy garden is sort of like doll housing for your garden. When I fell in love with this idea because I went to a Renaissance fair and I saw this woman making fairy gardens, which are little fairy figure. I'll show you a teacup one, actually. This is a little teacup garden. For those who don't have a green thumb, you don't have to plant anything, but it's considered a teacup garden. It has little fairy figurines and it has a little story going on. And so at the Renaissance fair, there I was, and this woman was making these things with glittery little lights and little fairy figurines, and I just fell in love. And I went home and I found a store very close to Book Carnival down in Tustin called M&M Nursery that sells fairy things, fairy garden things. So I went to the store and I walked inside, and there were walls, like my bookshelves, walls filled with fairy figurines and houses and little lights and all these things that you could decorate. And then if you went outside, there was a garden shop and you could buy plants and pots and everything to make a fairy garden. And she had all sorts of examples all over the garden place. And I was like enamored. It was like when I went into the cookbook shop. I went into this fairy garden shop and I went, I think this would make a good cozy series. So I went home with my goodies and I made a fairy garden. And in the fairy garden, I had this little blue fairy. And I said, oh, this is Fiona. She's going to live in my story. So my story falls into a paranormal, I hate that word because it's not quite what mine's about, a magical cozy mystery. Paranormal sort of to me means witches and goblins and skeletons and things that come to life. But this is a fairy that comes to life. Who of us didn't love Tinkerbell? So she's harmless. So let me tell you about those two characters. So the main character is Courtney Kelly, and she owns the fairy garden shop. She lost her mother when she was 10. And before that, she was able to see fairies. Her mother saw fairies, she saw fairies. Her mother died and she lost the ability. And so she followed in her father's footsteps and she became a landscaper, and she was very, very good at it. She did all the college courses and learned everything that she needed to be a good landscaper. But it just wasn't her passion. And when her Nana died and left her some money, she took that money and invested it in a store in Carmel by the sea. Carmel, California is a real place. It's one of the first places that I've written about a real place, because usually I make up places. But Carmel is a magical town filled with creatives, filled with artists and authors. And it's a beautiful, lovely town. So I decided that fairies absolutely live in Carmel. So when Courtney opens her fairy garden shop, because she, like me, went to a Renaissance fair, oh surprise, and she saw this fairy garden. Well, you write what you know. And she fell in love with fairy gardens and said, oh, I'd like to do this. I want to bring magic into people's lives. So she started this store, and on the very first day that she opened the store, Fiona appeared to her. Fiona is a teen fairy, like a teenage kind of fairy. She was kicked out of the fairy kingdom for being too much of an imp. And the queen fairy said, you have to go into the world of the humans and you have to learn to help them solve problems in order to grow your adult wings. And when you mature, maybe we'll let you back into the fairy kingdom. So Fiona has a goal. She wants to get back to the fairy kingdom, but she's also fallen in love with Courtney and her friends and her life. She's still a bit of an imp. She still has to be tamed, but she is very good at sleuthing because she is a righteous fairy. Now, you probably didn't know that there are levels to fairies. Oh, yes, I made this up. There are intuitive fairies and nurturer fairies, and there are righteous fairies, and a righteous fairy has to help humans solve problems. So Fiona and Courtney are my duo. They're not your typical Cagney and Lacey, but they definitely jibe on all things, and Courtney is very good at keeping Fiona in line. It is a sweet, light story. Like, you know, Vicki mentioned, it's a light story. It's a light mystery. Yes, there's a dead body, falls in the courtyard right out where they have the teas. So they do have to solve that and get Courtney off the hook because Courtney is the first suspect. That's in the very first book. The second book continues their journey.
That's what's fun about cozies. I was going to say, that is what's fun about cozies, isn't it? That we can, you know, it's just delightful. The way that you describe it. I read the first book. I haven't read the second one yet, but it's just delightful. And I hope that people say things like that about my books too, that, you know, I'm not tooting my own horn, but maybe I am. But that's why we read cozies. And I think that's why people read cozies, because they want to chuckle away at the scene that you painted and how charming it is. And it's also about people who are faced with problems, and they come together either with their grandmother and their best friend, or their fairy who lives in the bottom of their garden, to help solve their problems. I think you summed it up really well.
I've read your Christmas series, and I've your Christmas series and your Lighthouse series, and I find them equally just lighthearted and fun, and you just want to dive in and enjoy every moment of those characters because they're family to you. When you read them, those characters become a family. That's how I write them, is as my family. And it's, you know, these are people that I like to spend time with.
And this type of book has become very popular over the past year because people needed places to escape to. And they're well written. They're not, cozy indicates, you know, it got a bad rep. Let's face it.
It did.
But these have emotions and characters that you come to love and care about, and the interactions and the support they give one another. It's a feel-good type of book to read. And
I got a lot of emails over the last year from people saying just that, saying things about how they've been down and you know, trapped in their houses and depressed and not able to get out and all that sort of thing, and how much cozy books have helped them. And also when they're sick and tired of watching the news, and they turn the news off, and they can cuddle up with a book that speaks to them about friendship and companionship and you know, and that.
Yes, very true. So it's I would think you have both experienced a sense of growth with that over the past year and a half, because of the things that have gone on. More readership, more people, like you say, contacting you and making either of you aware of what your books are doing for them. I hear it at the store all the time. We always focused on these very serious mysteries, which we still love, of course, but I find the charm and the escapism that are in books like this to mean a great deal. And you pick such interesting subjects, you know, a little fairy who gets kicked out because she's not quite right and she has to mature. And you with your Place by the Sea, and Granny who left things and is pulling a teenager into problems. I like the reverse situations. It's not young people that are creating the problems, but I love it when the older ones throw a wrench into things every now and then.
Yeah.
It shows we're still living and still active and can create situations that are both interesting and comforting to read.
Yeah, right. You know, it's interesting because when I got into writing, I started out as a suspense author, but the first thing I sold was a cozy mystery. Well, I got hired. I got hired to write the Cheese Shop mystery series. Okay. And when I got into that, it was like, oh, I have a real affinity for this because it is something that I like to feel and give back to people. And that is lighthearted entertainment. It brings you up, it buoys you. And sometimes, I mean, there are dark mysteries I can't read, you know. Now I still write suspense. I do still write suspense and I love it, but I can't write somebody buried in the ground with bugs crawling all over him. It just makes me, oh, please don't, you know. So I can't write that. If I can't read it, then I can't write it. I know that. Yeah. And it's fascinating because I find that most of my fans sort of read like I do. They want entertainment. They want escapism. They want to know there's a happy ending, you know, a happy ending at the end of the book. And they want to feel good about the people that they're reading about. They want them to feel like friends. Yes, there might be, you know, the town crank, you know, that you don't like. Everybody has a town crank someplace. So, you know, or, you know, cranky member of the family. That's okay because they can identify that, you know, identify with that. But they really like someone who they want to say, I want to sit and have tea with. I want to sit down with this person and talk stories, you know. And I think that's the beauty of cozy mysteries. Cozy meaning, you know, you want to cuddle up with this and feel comfortable in your chair and not feel like you're going to, you know, be barraged by scary thoughts, I guess.
And images and I agree.
Yeah, it lifts the spirit. It really does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people like whodunits. They like to, you know, when they solve mysteries, they really like to go along with the story and see where you planted the clues and try to figure out before the author reveals, you know, where it happened. I think that part of solving mysteries as opposed to suspense where everything is going to go boom, 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 and you never know who did it, or you might, but you really want to get out of the way. In this case, it's more like, I want, oh, what was that clue? Oh, was that a clue? Let me think about that. And I think it makes for thinking readers.
Yeah, because I often say that I think the cozy mystery is a puzzle mystery, essentially. So that the clues should be laid out in a way that the astute reader has a chance of solving the mystery either at exactly the same time as the protagonist or just slightly before. So it's almost a game of wits between the author and the reader, that the author has to lay down the clues in such a way that they're completely fair, but they're not completely obvious. And then the writer rather has to also lay down the red herrings and the false clues and all that to distract the reader and send them off on the wrong path. And I think also that's something that cozy readers really like. Many reviews will either end with, I love this book because I never would have guessed who the killer was, or I've, hopefully not that many, but I was slightly disappointed because it was really obvious to me who the killer was. So that's what cozy readers are looking for, many of them. They're actually looking for that puzzle.
Do you know what I always ask, though, when my readers will say something like, well, I guessed it right at the beginning, I'll say, but did you guess why?
Yeah, in fact, I get that a lot too, because there's only really, four or five possible suspects. So it's one of them. But the why is usually it's more important than the who. Yeah, it's the why and the how sometimes. And
you know, when you used to watch Murder, She Wrote, okay, TV shows are clear about this. Murder, She Wrote, she'd have 3 guest stars on it. Well, you know, the killer or the victim is one of those 3 guest stars. So you're not going to be too far off when you say, oh, it was Angie Dickinson. I know it was her, you know. But why did she do it? Do you know why? And when it's finally revealed and you go, oh my gosh, I had no idea.
But then when it's revealed, it's completely obvious. It should never be, it's not the mad wife in the attic who comes down in the last scene. It should be quite obvious. And also that when someone reads the book a second time, they should be able to, and sometimes they do that, or readers like to do that, to be able to actually pick out, oh yeah, she changed her shoes between the first act and the second act, therefore she obviously is the killer. Right. Yeah.
Exactly right.
The other thing that I like about cozy mysteries is, especially in ongoing series, is that you become attached and feel affection for certain ones of the characters. You look forward to their idiosyncrasies or how they're going to do something. And it becomes something that you look forward to with pleasure because you know that they're going to be a certain way. I may not be expressing it well, but I find that that's what I do in the lighter books, because you always have somebody that has a little quirks, or I love a grandmother-granddaughter combination, which has been in a few books, mainly because I'm at that age. I'm a grandmother and I have grandchildren that are of various ages. And you almost wish you had that same interaction in your personal life to some extent. No bodies, thank you, but
right. Yeah, no vengeful relatives or anything like that. Yeah.
Oh, well, those always come along, but you don't want the bodies.
Yeah, but I agree. A lot of times, again, this is, you know, you get a character in there and you say, oh, that's my best friend, or I want a best friend like, you know, so in my Fairy Garden Mysteries, she had, this is going to be cute. So here's a cute moment. Her friend's name is Megan Brownie.
Oh, yeah.
Don't shake your head. It was cute. And Megan, because her name is Brownie, loves making brownies. Okay, they're very good friends. But you know, I've sprinkled those kinds of things into this story. Her cat's name is Pixie, so you know it's Pixie. You know, because a pixie is also a fairy. So little things along the way. I'm pretty sure she's going to get a friend whose name is Gnome. I'm not sure, but
well, I did that with the year-round Christmas mysteries. So my year-round Christmas mysteries, that Mary, Merry, is the main character, and her father's name is Noel, because he plays the town Santa Claus, and you know, her dog's named Matterhorn after the mountain in Switzerland, and that. So I did enjoy those names, playing a lot with the whole Christmas thing with those names.
It was very cute, very cute.
I want to live in the worlds you two have. You're just having way too much fun with this.
I do too. We have to come out there sometimes and, I don't know, do things we don't want to do.
Until there's a deadline, and then there's a deadline and you're going, ah!
Yeah.
And not just one deadline, because Vicki's writing multiple series and I'm writing multiple series. You get a deadline and you have a book that's due, but then just a week before it's due, you get another book back to you for edits, and they want that in a week. And it's like, uh-oh, I've got to do them both at the same time. So we're juggling. It's not like, you know, we're both multitasking at all times when it comes to our writing.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another section of being authors of this type of book, or any type of book. How do you spend your time? How do you do that juggling? And what impact does it have on family life?
Well, fortunately, I have no family life, because my children are all adults now. You know, my children are all grown up, and I'm divorced, so I live here all by my lonely self. Actually, it's fine. I live here by myself. My mother's still around. I see my mother, but she doesn't live near me, so I see my mother usually once a month. But I'm not a very disciplined person. So I have to enforce discipline upon myself, or I'd never get anything done. So I have a set time that I write every day, usually in the morning, 9 to 1-ish, 2-ish maybe. But I also have a set place where I write, and a set computer. I have a laptop computer that's used only for writing books. It's never been set up with FaceTime or email or Facebook or anything like that. And it's not even I'm sitting in my lovely big office where I do not write, because I write in another room on a computer that doesn't have all that stuff, because I just, you know, my fingers wander. You open your email, you open your Facebook, you do this, you do that, the other thing. And if I was sitting if I had all that connectivity around me, I would probably not ever get anything done. So I need to have a totally dedicated space and time.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm not like that. I'm very disciplined, so I can tell myself, don't touch Facebook until I've done my 2 hours of writing. But I love that you do that. I think that's so clever. I would never have thought to do something like that. But I'm like you. I try to write from 9 to 1. Yes, I may take a half hour off for Facebook. It's okay. I'll get back to it. But to get it all done, you have to have your schedule. And I hate to be off schedule. So if I'm off schedule, I'll write longer into the night if that's what I need. My kids, my son is grown. My stepson is grown. My stepdaughter is grown. I've got grandchildren. They're all boys. And sadly, my husband passed away. So I am here and lonely, but only lonely for him. So, so I have a lot of time to write. I do have a dog named Sparky. He requires an awful lot of energy. I do have to walk him twice a day, and sometimes 3 times a day, depending. I definitely have to throw for him at 7 o'clock at night. So he is not very happy right now because he wants me to throw toys for him. And he's going to have to wait until this is over.
Of course, I fed my 2 cats because they were already yowling outside my office door. And I rushed out just before I opened this up to feed them so they weren't hearing them in the background.
Yeah.
Animals are on a time clock and they're very vocal about it.
Oh, yeah.
They are. Not even a question. I will say that I had to juggle a lot of my writing when my husband was alive. I had to juggle between his schedule and my schedule. We shared an office. There are 2 computers here. We shared an office. And if he was writing here, I'd go to the coffee shop, and if I was writing, then he would go and watch some, sports on TV. So we had to juggle our time. My son was at home, our son was at home. I was an actress at that time. So it was a whole different schedule. The writing came later for me.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Covers are very important on both of your books because it opens up part of the world that you're trying to describe and draw people into. The answer is quite often the same, but how much involvement do either of you have with your covers?
Next to none, between none and almost none. Like Daryl, I'm published by a couple of different publishers who publish a different series. So it does depend on which publisher. Kensington publishes the Tea by the Sea series, and that was a matter of, here it is, we hope you like it.
Okay. Well,
and if I didn't like it, it wouldn't really matter because they like it.
I got a little more input. This is interesting. When I was at Berkeley, I did get to choose my artist, who was Krista Davis's artist, and she would ask for all sorts of images that I thought that I wanted on the book. And so I'd go online and I'd copy pictures and things and send them to the editor, and the editor would send it on to her. And she was fabulous. And I thought I got her for these books, which is interesting because they have the very similar look to my other books. For these, I also send images. So I'll send them a picture of the cat, and I'll send them some pictures of fairy gardens and different little things like little toadstools. I mean, I sent them pictures of toadstools, hoping that they would include them because those are in a fairy garden. And I sent them pictures. This is a watering can pouring lights out, fairy garden lights. And I sent them the fairy garden lights, and I said, they're used in all sorts of fairy gardens. See if you can get those on. So they're good about taking ideas, but I'm very industrious when it comes to that because I love the art part of it. I'm not an artist.
Yeah, because I'm not. But actually, I will say something about this. This cat is Robert the Bruce, who's Rose Campbell's cat. And he's actually very specific. So I did send them a picture of Robert the Bruce because I am one of the co-organizers of the Women Killing It Crime Writing Festival here in Prince Edward County. And at one of our events, we auctioned off for the support of the women's shelter, we auctioned off a character naming in one of our books. So the winner wanted me to name the character after her cat, Robert the Bruce. And she sent me a picture of Robert the Bruce. It looks like fortunately, it's a perfectly ordinary looking black cat, but it was quite easy to incorporate it into the book. So I did tell them that I wanted this cat to be on the cover, please. And they did that. But where you're different than me, Daryl, probably is that I'm happy to say, oh, do your worst. You go ahead and do it, but you like to get really involved. So I'm glad that they let you express your ideas like that. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I think because it started at Berkeley asked me, what do you have for ideas from the very first book?
Wow.
So I would send them ideas for the very first book. So I've just assumed that that's what they do. So I've done that for every series, every book, because I just assume that's what authors are supposed to do. I write my blurbs, I write a sample blurb, and I send off all the pictures the moment I send in the book. And then they have everything in front of them. And it's like, oh, I mean, I guess it makes their life easier. I just thought it was what we're supposed to do.
I'll start doing that too.
Making assumptions works at times, doesn't it? Yeah, I like that. But
my next Sherlock Holmes bookshop series, I did actually object to the cover because it was way too similar than the first book in the series. If you held the first book up and the new one up, they were almost the same. People weren't going to be able to identify it. So I did say to them for that, my main suggestion was just change the cover because it's a bookshop. So there's the cat lying on the table and there's a stack of books. And I just changed the color of the chair. Because in both cases it was red. That's why it looks exactly the same, almost exactly the same. Wow. So they did. So they made the second one a bright blue, which totally changed the look of it. So yeah, so I do get my 2 cents in more than I think I do.
Okay.
Now you both, correct me if I'm wrong, but you both use pseudonyms. For different series. Is this correct?
I did for the first one because I was a work for hire, meaning the publisher came up with the idea for a cheese shop. They knew what they wanted. I had an agent who said, "Do you think you can write about a cheese shop?" I said, "Sure." I gave them some sample chapters. They liked them and they hired me. I had to use a pseudonym because they owned the series. I got paid the same as any other author, but they owned this series.
Okay.
So that's why I became Avery Ames. And then when I came up with the cookbook Nook Mysteries, I said, that's under my own name. And from that point on, I've been Daryl Wood Gerber. So that's my real name.
Yeah. And my story is exactly the same. Eva Gates writes the Lighthouse Library series, which was a work for hire by Berkley also, so for the same reason. And actually that series was discontinued by Berkley, but it's still going on because it got picked up by Crooked Lane. So it's now coming up to the 9th book, I think. And I could have started using my own name again, but we felt that would just be too confusing to have a different name attending the series. So all my other books are under my real name, which is Vicki Delany, except the Lighthouse Library series. Yeah.
And my question is, do you ever feel that you lose or miss out on customers because they don't know that it's you, depending on which you they were attracted to?
Yeah.
Probably, yeah. It's hard to know whether you lose out or not, but I certainly am happy not that. I know authors who have 3 or 4 pseudonyms, and I'm sorry that I don't like having 2. It's confusing. Who am I today? And people will say, call me Eva. Well, that's actually not my name, Yeah, it's hard to do your bookmarks, your branding and all that sort of stuff when you have 2 names.
Okay.
Or more.
It absolutely, or more names. I mean, a romance author could have a mystery author name, like J.D. Robb and Nora Ephron. They have 2 separate names. She just didn't want her fans to, get confused by picking up a Nora Roberts, right? Nora Roberts book, and all of a sudden getting a sci-fi mystery. So she chose a different name, but she was a big enough author that she could do that. It's hard, someone even now. I mean, Avery was 10 years ago. That's when she started, and someone will come up and go, oh, you write the cheese shop mysteries? And I'll say, yes. Look in the back of the book. It's the same picture. Same picture, pretty much the same, but it's hard for them to understand. And I'll my newsletter says that I have both names. My Facebook says that I have both names. Even still, I'll have people come on Facebook and say, oh, I had no idea you were Avery Ames. It's like, do you ever look at the leader on the top? Because it says it.
Yeah, I get that too. I do know one author who can't use her own name now that she's a straightforward cozy mystery writer. She started off writing softcore porn under her real name, so she doesn't want that getting confused. So she's had unwillingly adopt the pseudonym.
That's funny. I do have a friend of ours, Jen McKinley, said that she wanted all her, if she was ever going to write a pseudonym, and she did write a pseudonym, but she said she wants the same real estate on a bookstore shelf. And so if she was ever to do it, she would at least, give herself the last name that looked the same. And I wish I'd thought of that. I chose Avery Ames because it was first in the alphabet. Right. And so I thought, first in the alphabet, first on a bookstore list, first in a library list, maybe they'll get to know me because it was my first book. But unfortunately, in some bookstores, Avery Ames is way up over there at the very top of the bookshelf, and nobody's going to get there.
There's always something, isn't there?
Always something, yeah.
Yeah. I know a couple of authors that have multiple series with multiple names, and I never know where to file them in the store, because if they, you know, if an author says, or a customer says, oh, I just love so-and-so's blank series. And I'm thinking, well, she writes all these others and they're really good. Now, what was the last name she used the last time she did a book? It gets really confusing.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
you don't have some card catalog kind of thing that would cross-check the names and stuff?
You mean I should be that organized?
Uh-huh.
Ah.
Uh-huh.
What I try to do is to group them, even though they're not alphabetical anymore, because it just makes it easier for me and for the other, and for the customers. But you at least limited to 2 names.
Right.
This person probably has 10, and it does get confusing every time there's a new series. Been writing for a very long time.
Well, so one of the reasons some authors have to have a pseudonym is they'll go to a new publisher, and the publisher will say, that last series you wrote under that name didn't do so well. Bookstores and libraries buy books by new authors, so we're going to rebrand you as somebody new. And that's why all of a sudden the name will change, because the publisher is not willing to go with the old name that maybe had been either a flop or just a semi-failed series or whatever. And so therefore, you have to reach out and try to come up with a new name. And that's very difficult, because authors don't want to do that typically.
No.
But if your name is going to be an albatross, then you got to cut it.
Okay. Yeah. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Because in this particular case, I like everything she writes. So again, it was a puzzle to me. All right. And what is next on the agenda for each of you?
Well, I have something. I have a brand new series starting in September. It's coming out from Berkeley, and it's just the Catskills Resort Mysteries. It's something quite different for me because it's set in 1953 at a resort in the Catskills. And the main character is named Elizabeth Grady. She is the resort manager. And her mother, Olivia Peters, is a former Broadway star, who's retired Broadway star. Her third husband stole all her money. And then she unexpectedly inherited this Catskills resort, and she managed to talk her daughter into coming and running it for her. So it's very 1953. I really had fun with the food, the clothes, the cars, just the atmosphere and all that. And the first book is called Deadly Summer Nights. It will be out in mass market paperback on September the 7th.
That's wonderful. And under what name?
Vicki Delany.
Okay. Yeah. It sounds great. And the period is one that not very many people write about. So that should be fascinating. Yeah. And I like the Catskills anyway.
That's
and how about you?
People with memories of the Catskills. Yep.
Yeah.
Nobody puts baby in the corner.
There you go. That'll be there forever, isn't it? And Daryl, what about you?
Well, the third in the Fairy Garden Mysteries comes out next year. It's called A Hint of Mischief. And the 11th of the Cookbook Nook Mysteries comes out next April. And we don't have the title yet. So I've given him 7 titles to choose from, and he likes all of them. So he said, let me see how the book turns out, and then we'll choose one. I went, okay.
Oh, wow.
And I'm working on a new suspense, and I'm crossing my fingers that I can find someone who thinks it's wonderful and wants to publish it. So that's what's in my wheelhouse right now.
It sounds wonderful. It also sounds far enough off that maybe we can count on in-person events, which we all want to do.
Yeah.
I was supposed to go to California last October. I did have a schedule of events in California, and I was going to Poison Pen in Scottsdale and doing some things. So maybe next year. maybe.
Let's keep fingers crossed. We certainly hope that. And if you do, you've got to include us, Vicki, at Book Carnival.
The ball is now in your court, because on August the 7th, the Canadian border is opening to fully vaccinated Canadians, but the Americans have not returned the favor yet.
And you may not want to come here right now because we're getting, you know, it's spreading again.
Yeah.
We're back to masks, mandates, and all those good things. So
well, maybe next year.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope not. Let's hope it's
this
you
year.
know, something magic happens and we're past all this.
Do you know anybody who writes a magical series that could maybe wave their magic wand and make it go away?
But we don't even want them in books anymore. We're so tired of pandemic.
Right.
And too many of the serious books are using the pandemic, or at least having it in the background because they're moving through this period of time. But I don't know about everyone else, but I just don't want to read about it. I do enough of that and hear enough about it. How about questions? We've done all this talking. Any of you ladies have questions for our authors? Karen.
I have a question. I was wondering what the ladies read for their own pleasure. They, particularly Daryl, writes a variety of things. What is it that you settle in and just read when you need a break?
Well, I do read cozies. Okay, so I read Vicki's because I mentioned those. I read Krista Davis. I read Ginger Bolton. I love those books. But I also read suspense. I'm currently reading a suspense by Hilary Davidson that I love Hilary's writing. I'm listening to a Daniel Silva book called The Heist, which is brilliant. It's just lovely. So I will read, but I read specifically suspense and mystery. That's where I stay. Occasionally I'll pick up a romance, but very, you know, that'll be like once a year. Well, that's not true. A couple times a year, because I did read Jen McKinley's romance and it was fabulous. Loved that. And I'll read every once in a while, I'll read a children's book because I want to read it for my grandkids, make sure it's okay, and then pass it along to them. So, you know, I keep myself busy, but mostly mystery and suspense.
Yeah, and I'm actually pretty much the same. And I do like to mix things up a little bit, the same sort of way that I will read a cozy, particularly because I know so many cozy authors. And there is something nice. You mentioned Jen McKinley. I would never read a romance, but I know her so well, and I like her so much. Her personality comes through in the book. You know, you kind of know that Jen wrote it, and so I like reading books by people that I know personally. So I read a fair amount of cozies for that. But I do like some of the darker stuff, but not too dark. I really enjoy the sort of domestic suspense, the British domestic suspense. I recently read Ruth Ware's one, Forget the One by One, where they're sort of trapped in a ski resort somewhere. I read that one. And Lucy Foley, I think it is, the same sort of thing, group of people that are trapped in some kind of a remote place, and one of them is a killer and all that. And yeah, that kind of suspense is not too dark, but it's definitely gripping. So I like that. It depends on what kind of mood I'm in, whether I feel like something a little on the lighter side, a little on the darker side. But I never switch books. You know, I mean, if I start a book, I finish it. Unless I'm not liking it, in which case I won't finish. But what I mean is I will start a book and read it to its completion before I pick up another book. I know a lot of people mix them all up, but I never do that. I need to be.
Yeah, I read one at a time, but I will listen to one at the same time because they do take separate avenues of my brain.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of people do that. The listening and reading as well. Yeah. Okay. Question.
And I just have for both of you, you're juggling a couple of series. So in a normal year, do you have 2 deadlines, one for each series or one for a series that you're developing?
I actually write 4 books a year. So I'm writing 4. So I didn't even talk about. So I write the Lighthouse Library series as Eva Gates, and then I write the Sherlock Holmes Bookshop series, the Tea by the Sea series, and the new Catskill Resort series is Vicki Delany. The Christmas Town books that we talked about are finished. They had 5 books in that series. So I write 4 books a year.
Wow.
Wow. So that's,
Wow.
And it's not just the writing of the books, but you know, the edits will come flying in for this one that you finished 2 months ago, and and sometimes I kind of forget which book's next? Because I finished the third in the Tea by the Sea mysteries. I finished that 2 months ago. So now I have to talk about the second one, Murder in a Teacup. But the third one is fresher in my mind. So I have to forget about that because I don't want to talk about that. So sometimes keeping them straight can be a little bit of a juggle for sure.
Yeah, I don't write as much as Vicki. I mean, I write 3 books a year, but depends on the year whether 2 come out or 3 come out. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard to keep them straight. It's hard to juggle them. I work with an outline. I don't know about Vicki, but I work with an outline so that if I do need to freshly review what story I'm going to talk about, I can go and read that outline to give myself all my pointers of what I just wrote, because I, like you, Hint of Mischief is the one that's fresh in my mind, not Glimmer of a Clue, but pretty well because I did base it on a person I really didn't like. So it was very clear in my head what I wrote. You know, but it's hard to keep them juggling, but we juggle. That's why we work from 9 to 1 in the morning, and then you create the, you know, what do you need for the afternoon? Is it rewriting? Is it PR? We have to do PR too. I mean, that's the other thing for authors. Didn't have to do this 20 years ago, but authors now, we are expected to do a lot of our own PR, and it takes a lot of time, and we can get sucked down the rabbit hole doing it. So we have to be very precious of our time. You know, when we do need to write, we got to write because we do have the deadline to hit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think wearing more hats than you used to in the past is really difficult. I hear this from other authors. And the PR stuff itself takes on a life that can just encompass you.
It would be interesting to think what would have happened if we didn't have all this technology in case of, like right now with the pandemic.
Right.
I mean, basically all the new books would have just died on the shelf. There's been like no way of getting the word out unless you got reviewed in the top newspapers, but nothing else. So yeah, there's a lot of work, but you know, and certainly over the last year, hopefully we've been able to keep. I think you've got I do feel sorry for new writers who had their first book come out over the last year who haven't built up an audience yet.
Right.
Very hard.
Yeah, you know, they just
the blessing of something like this is I'll have people, you know, in Indiana saying, I wish you'd come to an Indiana bookstore. And I'll say, well, go on Zoom and you can watch me at Book Carnival. You know, I mean, and it gives them at least a chance to come and participate, you know, even though, you know, it's not their bookstore, at least it's participating and they can ask the same questions they would if they were sitting in the same room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just think we've had, all of us feel pretty much this way. We've had so much Zoom. We're more than ready to be done with it. So we're looking forward to having people in. We even wound up doing our book club, and I have a back parking lot behind the store, and we weren't ready to be indoors. So we're having our book club out in the parking lot.
Oh, fine.
And having so much fun with it because it's such a relief to be together again.
Yeah. Well, I have a book launch plan for my local bookstore. There's a lovely little bookstore. I live near quite a small town, and there's a lovely little bookstore. September the 9th for the new, you know, for the new series, because I'm hoping we've got a date. It's penciled in, but I'm hoping people are going to be so desperate to get out and talk to other people that they'll all flock to my book launch.
Well, Canada has done such a wonderful job on getting people inoculated.
Oh, yeah.
If I were betting, I would bet that you'll be able to have that event.
Well, yeah, we're certainly hoping so. You know, things are opening up a little bit, but you know, yeah, let's hope. That's all.
No, we watch things declining here and are kind of envious of the other areas that have done a better job than we have getting things under control. It fluctuates so much, you're just not sure from day to day. But that's why we can escape.
Masks work.
Yes. So do vaccinations. Let's get them done.
So do vaccinations.
But this is why we love to escape into books that, like you ladies create for us. It's another world, and it's a happy world, and we like that. Any more questions from anyone? Any more things you'd both like to tell us? You've done a wonderful job. This has been so interesting.
No, it's just lots of fun. Always fun.
What was that?
I said, always fun to chat to people. Always fun to chat to Daryl.
Yep, you too.
All right. Well, I want to thank both of you. It's been wonderful. This is recorded. It's available. So I'll have it somewhere. And if anybody wants a copy, they can let me know if they're not able to find it. But the recordings are always fun, and it gives someone who couldn't be with us tonight the opportunity to see the event.
Great.
I want to thank both of you, and hopefully we get together for the next book under any name.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you
for hosting us.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Good night.